wet into wet. That would be wet brush into wet paper. And I can tell it's wet because there's a shine there, and there's still a shine here. So what I'll show you while this dries a little bit is what you can do in wet paper. So I'm going to take some of my yellow. I like to start my watercolors working light to dark. So in this wet paper, I'm just going to let you see what will happen with the wet paper. Notice how it's just spreading all over the place. It's exploding, and it scares everyone because there's no control. I can do a wonderful background on wet paper just simply by dropping in the colors. Now I am surprised that that didn't explode, but it didn't. So that was yellow ochre on top of the permanent yellow light. Well, this is not behaving. Let me just make it wet again. So there's wet paper, no doubt. I just put that everywhere. That is definitely wet. And I'm going to add a little bit of green to it. And here you can see what can happen adding a second color. And how you can use wet paper to build a background. All right next to it would be the damp paper. What I want to show you about the damp paper is it will hold the edges. It will hold an edge. You can contour on damp paper. You can build a pattern on damp paper. It will hold a line. Whereas the wet paper will not. Even so, this is wet because it's shining. So it has gone to damp. So excuse me, I was hoping to do a little bit more on the wet paper. Let's talk about how to go from dark to light. So I'm going to work this direction, and on dry paper I'm adding cobalt blue at the top here, and I want to get some good strong color. There, some good strong color. Notice how the bead of water is along the bottom there, and I'm just going to bring that down, bring that down, bring that down, bring that down. And at some point, I can wash my brush out, and it starts to disappear. I'm using gravity to bring the color downward. This is called a gradation, and it disappears. So I want to just show you once again something on wet paper. I seem to be having a little trouble. So this is wet paper. There we go. I'm setting the borders with the wet water. And that is wet. Maybe I didn't have it wet enough. And I'm going to drop in some color. Let's start with the permanent. There you go. And it's just going everywhere. If I held this up, it would just roll all over the place because it's wet. And it would stay inside the borders. This is called rolling. And it will give you a flat wash if you just keep rolling it. But it's wet, so I'm going to drop in and it just explodes like fireworks. You can see it just exploding outward. If I let it dry like this flat, it would dry just like that. Or I can actually roll it around and it will all mix together. But you know what? I kind of like all these little explosions of color. I'm going to leave it alone and I will show you a picture, a photo of it when I'm finished. So just see all these marvelous little lines here, and let's see how it dries. This is actually a puddle. All right, so some pigment controlling techniques. Wet into wet, wet brush into wet paper, wet brush into damp paper. It's still damp. I could actually hold a line on damp paper. And these lines, these little dots are holding, and yet they're very soft. And then gradation, going from dark to light. Wet brush into wet paper. All right.